Hello everybody, welcome back. If you're new here, my name is Becca and today I have my August and Magical Readathon wrap up. So in the month of August, I actually did pretty well in terms of the amount of books that I read, but my page count was a little bit lower than it usually is. So I actually read one more book than I read last month, but there's like 1,000 pages of difference between this month and last month because not a single book that I read was particularly chunky throughout the month of August. I definitely had a decent start of the month. I read 8 books in the first 2 weeks of the month, and then it took me 2 weeks to read the following 3 books because I ended up feeling just a little bit slumpy. But in terms of the quality of the books that I read in August, like the majority of them weren't all that great, as you guys will see when we get to the stats. And in terms of the Magical Readathon, it was a roaring success for me. I did manage to complete all of the prompts that I needed for my calling, as well as an additional one that I didn't need, and also 2 quests. So I'm not going to go into the specifics of those prompts here because I have covered it in all of the vlogs that I've done throughout the month. But yeah, I succeeded in everything that I needed to for this round of the Magical Readathon. So before we get into all of those lovely stats, I would just like to introduce you guys to the sponsor of today's video, which is once again the wonderful Book of the Month. If you guys are unaware of Book of the Month at all, they are a US only book curation service that offer you guys a range of 5 to 7 brand new hardback releases every single month that you can pick up for a price that is cheaper than you can find them anywhere else. Something that I really love about Book of the Month is that, as you will see with this month's selection, there are a range of books by best-selling authors, really well-known authors, and like books that you can't wait to get your hands on, and also lesser-known authors, so you guys can try out something new or like outside of your comfort zone if you would like to. So I do have 2 of Book of the Month September selections here to show you guys, but before I do, I did just want to mention that the romance selection for September is Love on the Brain by Ali Hazelwood, which absolutely would be one of the books that I picked if I didn't already have a copy. So the first book that I've selected for September is Killers of a Certain Age by Deanna Rayborn, which is their thriller pick. And the reason why I really wanted to read this one is that it is about a group of elderly assassins that were assassins for this secret organization, and now they're 60 years old, but they can't quite seem to leave their old profession behind them. This is a thriller, but it seems like it's going to have a little bit of a comedic twist as well, and I'm really excited to pick this one up. And the second book that I picked is something that was a little bit different for me because it is actually the September contemporary fiction pick, but that is The Fortunes of Jaded Women by Caroline Huynh. And this is a story about generations of Vietnamese women whose ancestor left her marriage for true love. So a Vietnamese witch actually cursed the family so that they would never find true love or happiness. So only daughters can be born into this line, and they are destined to have a terrible time essentially. So something about the melancholic nature of this, and also the little bit of a fantastical twist with this curse, really drew me to this one, and I'm expecting great things. So if any of these books sound interesting to you and you would like to pick up a Book of the Month for yourself, you can head into my description box, click on the link right at the top, and enter the code Becca at checkout to get your very first Book of the Month book for $9.99. And once again, a big thank you to Book of the Month for continuing to support my channel. So getting into those sweet statistics, in the month of September I read a total of 10 books, which added up to 3,489 pages and broke down to an average of 813 pages per day. Now this is what I usually say is around my average, but realistically in recent months and recent years my average tends to be more around 4,000 pages, so this is just a tiny bit low for me, but it is like my kind of old norm, if that makes sense. For the star ratings, I had 2 2-star reads, 4 3-star reads, 3 4 stars, and just 1 5, which broke down to an average of 3.3 stars per book, with my normal average rating being around 3.6. So like I said, the quality was just not really there this month. And for the demographics, I read 4 young adult books and 6 adult. For the formats, we had 5 standardly formatted novels, 2 comics, 1 audiobook, 1 e-arc, and 1 ebook. For the genres, we had 5 fantasy, 2 romance, 1 fantasy romance, 1 paranormal, and 1 sci-fi that was also kind of a romantic suspense, and I just really don't know how to categorize it. And finally, for the places where I sourced these books from. 5 of them were from my own TBR that existed prior to the start of 2022. 2 of them were from Kindle Unlimited. 2 of them I've hauled in 2022, and 1 of them was sent to me by the author. So kicking off with those reviews, I started the month with my Unhaul project, which is where I read a series of books that I'm kind of unsure about to see whether I want to keep them, and I also obviously give myself the license to DNF so that I can just clear them off my shelves if I'm really not interested. But the first one that I read for that project was my audiobook, which is The Bright and the Pale by Jessica Rubinkowski. The audiobook for this is available on Scribd, which is how I listen to it, and this is also a fairy loot book, so the edition is a little bit different to the standard one. But this one was just, this was a 2-star read for me, and it was just a very, very generic young adult fantasy where I just knew every single story beat and plot point that was going to happen in here because I've literally read it 1,000 times before. So this is following a young girl called Valeria whose hometown was on top of this mountain where they mine this valuable substance that you can mix with, I think it's iron, to make an impenetrable substance. So there was a town on this mountain and the town ended up encased in ice. So the main character was actually the only person who survived. So she obviously fled and ended up joining up with this thieves guild where she made friends with this guy who's called Alec. Now Alec has actually been murdered, except he hasn't, which he does say in the synopsis, so I don't really understand the point in this like backwards and forwards that we're going with here. And the main character is told that Alec is alive and that she can see him, providing she leads this expedition of people to the town where she's from, which she really doesn't want to do because obviously it holds a lot of bad memories for her. The one thing that I did like about this is that the Bright and the Pale are 2 gods, and the magic system in here is kind of like people are chosen as champions of the gods, and 1 god represents kind of like life and 1 represents death. It's on like kind of a scale system which one of them is in the lead in this kind of eternal war that they have going on. That was literally the only thing that I really liked about it, because there were a ton of betrayals and stuff in here that like you could just really see coming. It also fell very much into the cliche of this girl being in love with her best friend, but how can she tell him, because if he knows it'll ruin everything, and that kind of vibe that we've been reading since like 2005, you know what I'm saying? So yeah, this really, like, it was fine, but that's literally all I can say about it. It wasn't good or bad. It was literally just fine and the same as a whole bunch of YA fiction that I've read before. The second book that I read for my Unhaul project was my first DNF. I didn't actually get very far into this because I realized that I was kind of just dragging my feet on it, but that was Starter for 10 by David Nichols. This one is it's kind of a contemporary story. It's historical fiction because it's set a couple of decades before the book was actually published. It's set in 1985, but it's following this guy who goes to university from this small town, and he's the first person in his family to go, and his father actually died, but he has very fond memories of watching University Challenge with his dad, and his dad saying like, oh, like, you're gonna be there one day, like, you're gonna be clever enough to answer these questions. So when he goes to university, he meets this girl who is on the University Challenge team. So to impress her and also to honor his father, he also joins the University Challenge team. Now I've seen the movie for this and I really like it, but the reason why I own this book and wanted to read it is because David Nichols is also the author of One Day, which is also one of my favorite books. My issue with this and why I was really putting off reading it is that kind of the point of this is that the main character is so obnoxious. Like, he comes from this little town going to university and he thinks he's hot shit, and then he gets there and he realizes that the world is so much bigger than he ever imagined that it was, and he's kind of put in his place real quick, and he realizes that like this isn't going to be how it was in his head. And while it is the point that the character is obnoxious and that his voice is really intolerable in a lot of ways, having seen the movie, I just didn't need to put myself through this book and how irritating the main character is when I already have the gist from the movie, and that was fine, and I wasn't overly interested in this story. The next one that I picked up for that project was Other Words for Smoke by Sarah Maria Griffin, which I actually ended up enjoying more than I anticipated. I gave this one 3 stars. The reason that this was on the Unhaul cart is that I thought that it was magical realism or fabulism, but it's actually more like fantasy horror. It isn't the type of horror that I really like, but I do think that the atmosphere was very good in this one, which is why I ended up enjoying it. So this is following a brother and sister called May and Rossa, and their parents are actually going through a rough patch. So they take them to their great aunt's house where there is a teenage girl staying there called Bevan, and they haven't really communicated to their children what's happening with their relationship. They're like going on holiday, but they're actually not, and they're taken to their aunts just to get them out of the way, really, and the kids know pretty much what's going on. So they're there for the summer, where a lot of unsettling things happen in this house, which I don't want to say it's haunted, it's more infested by a demonic presence. And their aunt is actually, I don't know if I'd call her a witch or whether I'd call her more of a seer. She moonlights as a fortune teller, but she actually has like some sort of magical gift. So a lot of unsettling things happen over this first summer, and everyone kind of thinks that it's dealt with until the brother and sister actually return for a second summer while their parents are getting a divorce, and more unsettling things happen. My favorite thing about this was the atmosphere. I really liked the writing, and I loved Sarah Maria Griffin's writing style in this. I also really liked the structure of it being told across these 2 summers, and in between that we had a section, I think it was called Vignettes of Other Summers, where it was going through these summers in between these 2 where everything's going on, and also throwing it back to one of their Aunt Rita's summers when she was a teenager. So yeah, it very much surprised me because first off, it was a very different genre than I thought it was, and I was really sucked into the atmosphere of this. I just don't think it's a super memorable read, which is why it didn't get any higher than a 3-star. A book that I gave 4 stars to, and I was really expecting to be quite ambivalent about, is Witchy by Ariel Slamé Rees. Now, I did also read the second volume of this, which is available on Kindle Unlimited, directly after the first one because I enjoyed it that much. This series is set in a world where you can have a witch gift, and the strength of your gift is determined by the length of your hair. However, if you're too powerful, you will kind of be deemed an enemy of the nation and burned for your power. So this story starts off where the main character is a very small child, and her father is taken and burned because of the length of his hair. So as the main character is growing up and she's attending school, she is very much trying to hide the length of her hair because she doesn't want to be hired into the witch guard. She doesn't want people to know that she's strong at all, and she does actually have issues with her power even though her hair is quite long. There is a kind of series of tests that happens to test the strength of people in every class to see whether they are actually strong enough to join the witch guard, and when the main character goes through this, she actually has a really good talent for battle strategy. So the length of her hair and how she's been disguising it is actually found out. I didn't like the art style when I was flicking through this, and art style is something that is very important to me, but when I actually read the book, I found that it actually was very fitting to the storyline. We also have quite a modern way of speech throughout here that doesn't fit the kind of like medieval fantasy time period and setting that you have throughout here. It's like a typical high fantasy setting without any technology or anything like that. But saying that, the way that we have this juxtaposition between the more modern style of speech and also the setting also really worked for me. We also have an animal companion in here, which is a crow. I think he's called Banana, and he was a great time, and it actually reminded me a lot of Isola, which is a comic series that I've read the first 2 volumes of, and I really wanted to enjoy it because I love the art style, but the story just wasn't there for me. This actually felt like a very similar story, but in a much more compelling way that I was actually interested in. So this is actually a webcomic. The first 2 volumes have been bound into print, and I'm assuming that there is more to come, but this was a big surprise, and I'm very excited to continue reading the series in the future. I then did a little romance reading vlog, and the first book that I read was not actually romance. It is romantic in nature. There is a romance in it, but it is definitely more of like a lit fic / contemporary fiction book, and that is You Made a Fool of Death with Your Beauty by a.k.a. I did actually listen to the audiobook of this, so I actually listened to 2 audiobooks this month, which I've only just realized. But the narrator for the audiobook, is it Barney Turpin? It's the same audio narrator as The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas anyway, which is another audio that I've listened to and really enjoyed. I will say though that it was slightly jarring to kind of, because obviously when I listen to an audio, I associate the narrator with the character that they're portraying in whichever book they've narrated. So it was a little bit jarring going from The Hate You Give to this, where the first chapter is a sex scene. So the main character of this one is a woman called Faye. I think she's maybe around 30, but her husband actually died in a car crash a few years ago, and she's really been struggling to come to terms with this and allow herself to move on, because it's not like there was anything wrong with her marriage. Her husband died and she loved him very much, and she doesn't know how to move on with her life. So when we're starting this book, we're kind of getting to the point where she's maybe ready to try dating again, and there are actually quite a few men that are present in this book. The synopsis does give very little away. It just says that the main character is given the opportunity of a lifetime to escape the city and go to this like amazing vacation spot. While she's there, she starts falling for the one man that she can't have. So it is very ambiguous, and I'm not going to spoil it for you and tell you like why she can't fall for the man that she's falling for, but I will say that it is very, very messy. Like, as she's talking to men and getting close to men throughout this book, I'm thinking like, I don't understand what the issue is. Like, I don't understand why you can't fall for this man. And then I find out which man is the man, and I was like, oh damn, I see what the issue is here. The situation that the main character gets herself into is very, very messy, but the actual romantic relationship itself in this book is the least problematic thing that I have ever read in my entire life. So I ended up giving this one 3 stars because I did enjoy being along for the ride in this. But if you ask me to very quickly sum up what this book is about, I would say that it is about the main character finally dealing with and moving on from the death of her husband and learning to forgive herself, even though the event that killed her husband wasn't her fault, and finally moving on with her life. So essentially I went into this book with very different expectations than what this book actually is, because this was sent to me in a romance subscription box. So I expected it to be like your straight up contemporary romance, like rom-com vibes, and it was actually dealing with grief a lot more than I expected to. And as I mentioned, it has more of a contemporary fiction, like lit ficky vibe to it, which I don't mind reading about. I just wish that it would be disclosed in the synopsis if like something like grief or something really heavy is going to be like such a core part of the novel. I then read my favorite book of the month. It was a 5-star read. I'm obsessed. I'm reading the sequel in September and I cannot wait. But that was Her Soul to Take by Harley LaRue. This was my Patreon pick for the month of August, and I didn't realize how much I was going to love this, but it was truly something. So this is a fantasy romance. It's kind of paranormally, but I would categorize it as fantasy romance because the creatures that we're dealing with are gods and demons, which I personally associate more with fantasy than I do paranormal. But it's set in this Northern American kind of small town, and the main character is moving back to the town where she grew up, that her father's actually from. And the reason she's moving there is that her parents have retired to Spain and she still needs to finish out college. And she also has a YouTube channel where she does like paranormal investigations because she's very superstitious, and there are a lot of legends surrounding this town that she feels like she can explore. So residing in this town, we have this very rich family who have a demon that they've summoned that does their bidding, and what they are trying to do is resurrect the god that slumbers beneath the town by feeding it sacrifices and getting the demon to actually carry out these sacrifices for them. So one day our main character Ray gets hold of the grimoire that summons their demon, and she's about to perform like a shock summoning for her YouTube channel that she doesn't expect to actually succeed, and lo and behold she summons this very sexy demon called Leon. Now, as Leon is a demon, this is a little bit of a monster romance, but I don't like my monster romances to be like full-on monster. I like it to be like 90% man, 10% monster, and Leon is that kind of split. So he has a forked tongue, he has pointed teeth, he has claws, and he has anatomical differences that I guess are kind of similar to the aliens in Ice Planet Barbarians, if you're familiar. And this is a very kinky fantasy romance, would definitely recommend looking up a full list of kinks. But we have like spanking and impact play, there's blood play, consensual non-consent, restraint, and a whole ton of other stuff. So there is a full list on Goodreads along with a list of triggers that you guys can check out if you are at all interested. Very importantly for me, the romance and the smut was really, really good, but we also had a decent plot that was kind of holding everything together. But what I will say is that my absolute favorite thing about this book was how nostalgic it felt. It very much felt to me, as the main character was traveling back to this town where she's from, it very much felt like Bella Swan arriving in Fox for the very first time. It felt like whatever the main character of Hush Hush by Becca Fitzpatrick is called, Leon was like a version of Patch that my adult self really needed. And this book was just very reminiscent of all of that paranormal romance that I would hate now, but that I loved back in like 2010, all grown up. So if Hush Hush and Twilight was your thing when you were like 15, I feel like at this point in your life, you might very much enjoy Her Soul to Take. It's weird to say that it reminded me of YA because the subject matter and the content of the book was very much adult, but the feeling, the setting, and the atmosphere felt very much like that paranormal romance that I loved when I was a teenager. So absolutely obsessed. Leon is very, very sexy as well. And I'm really excited to read the sequel in September, which follows a different demon and a different human woman. I then read another big disappointment, which was the fine print by Lauren Asher. I read this because Steph has very kindly asked me to co-host her Cliterature Book Club, which is a romance book club, for the month of August. And the live show for this, I believe, is going to be on Steph's channel at 8 p.m. on the 7th of September, I think. But this one is a contemporary romance that is following like the imagined grandsons of Walt Disney, but it's not Walt Disney. He has a different name. But essentially, this guy has died who like was the founder of like, is it called, I think it's called Dreamland. And he has left a letter for each of his grandsons, giving them a certain task that they need to perform to be able to unlock their inheritance. So in this one, we are following Rowan, who is either the youngest or the middle child. And the instructions he's been given by his grandfather is that he has to create a project to renovate Dreamland for its like, I think it's his 50th anniversary or something like that, and he has to see this project through to its conclusion, and a board of impartial judges are going to come and judge whether he has done a good job, and if he has, he can have his section of his inheritance. Our female protagonist in here is a like cast member at Dreamland, and one day she puts in an application after they've put out like the call outs to see if anyone has some ideas to kind of jog Rowan's creativity. She ends up really drunk submitting a scathing like criticism of one of Dreamland's main attractions, and she expects to be sacked. However, Rowan actually hires her onto the team of creators, which is pretty much her dream job. Now, this is a kind of hate to love romance. These two really don't get on because they're grumpy sunshine. He is very serious, very much focused on his job. Since the death of his mother, he's pretty much lost all of the creativity and joy for life that he's had, and he's become like the cold calculating businessman, whereas she is very creative, very flamboyant, and a lot more fun than he is. Now, I still really don't like grumpy sunshine romances. This was 100% not an exception. The guy in here, Rowan, is very much like, you can tell at multiple points throughout this that Lauren Asher has read The Hating Game, and he does have a couple of elements of Joshua Templeman in him. There is also things just like, there were quotes and things that he said that really reminded me of The Hating Game and things that Josh has said. And surprisingly, that still didn't do it for me. That still didn't win me over to this book, because one of my main issues with this, I don't know if I mentioned, I gave it 2 stars, but one of my main issues is that this is just far too long, and there are elements of it that also just don't make sense. So we're like halfway through this book, and Rowan has done something that's really upset Zara to the point where she's not talking to him, and he jumps through like a million hoops to get this girl to talk to him, to give him the time of day after he's upset her. And when she finally does, he says like, oh, by the way, we just have to keep this casual, where it's obvious that like it isn't casual, because if it was, then he wouldn't have jumped through so many hoops to get her attention. So it just all kind of felt redundant, and that element of the book felt like it could have been part of the main like conflict of the book, but then it carries on for like another 200 pages. So yeah, I very much was not impressed by this. I said at the time that I read it I might continue and see how I feel about the sequel. Now I'm not so sure. It was okay, it was fine. It felt to me like a rom-com that you put on just to pass the time for the vibes, but it's not one that sticks in your mind. So it's like a B-list rom-com essentially in book form. I then tried to read the Old Kingdom series by Garth Nix in a week, and sadly it was not a good time. I did manage to read Sabriel, but I did DNF Lyriel around 200 pages in, so I sadly never got to Abortion. I really wanted to love this series. This is a series that I did truly think that I was going to enjoy, and I just really did not like the writing style. So this is a pretty classic YA series that I know a lot of people love. It is a series that I missed out on reading when I was a teenager because I just didn't feel like the covers were appealing to me. There was nothing about them that made me feel like they were going to be books that I enjoyed. And what do you know? 12-year-old me knew better than 29-year-old me does, because 12-year-old me stayed the hell away from this series, and I decided to give it a chance, and it turns out I didn't like it after all. And I just want to say as well, the reason why I didn't like this has nothing to do with it being the wrong time of my life that I read it, because this is one of those YA series that I feel like stands up to the test of time, and it kind of reminds me of the like Northern Lights series, His Dark Materials by Philip Pullman, where it's technically a children's book, but it can be read at any time in your life and you'll like still gain value from it. It was truly just the writing style and the magic system that really did not do it for me. So this one is following a young woman called Sabriel who's 18 years old, and she lives inside this walled city and attends a boarding school there. Her father is actually a necromancer called Abortion, or he is the Abortion, because that's actually a title, not a name. And one day she's visited by a creature who gives her her father's like sword, bells and other items. So from this, Sabriel very quickly discovers that something has happened to her father, and she heads off into the Old Kingdom, which is this area that's full of free magic, to locate her father. I knew that there were 6 books in this series, and I knew that 3 of them were published much later than the first 3. But what I didn't know is that this is kind of like a standalone, and the next book was actually published 6 years later. So they don't flow as like a typical trilogy or series does, because this is very much like a self-contained plot that wraps up within this first book. But the thing that I didn't like about the magic system in this is that there are 2 ways of using it, or 2 types of magic. You have the charter marks, that is kind of like the civilized way of using magic, and then you have free magic, which I don't feel like is properly explained, but I feel like Sabriel uses it by ringing bells, and each bell does a different thing, because the necromancers in this book, or the type of necromancer that Sabriel and her father are not the kind that raise the dead. They are the kind that protect the living by putting the raised dead back to rest. And they have this like bandolier full of bells that does different things to the dead when you ring the bells. And it just wasn't concrete enough for me. I like a concrete magic system with hard rules that was very well established and explained at the beginning. And this is just not the kind of magic system that does that, unfortunately. The writing style in here also reminded me a lot of series that I really don't like. It reminded me of The Demon Cycle by Peter V. Brett, which was an okay book for me. I've only read book 1. It also reminded me a lot of Earthsea, especially with the plot of this and also what I read of this. Very much like fighting shadows and demons in a way that like the first I think it's the first Earthsea book has that plot. Also reminded me in writing style of the 2 Neil Gaiman books that I've read, or is it 3 that I've read and didn't like. I've definitely read Norse Mythology and Stardust. I can't remember if I've read anything else, but I didn't like either of those. I will say that I have been told that I've chosen very bad Neil Gaiman books, so I will continue to give Neil Gaiman a chance, but once again reminiscent of something that I didn't enjoy. So this isn't a series where I think that these are bad in any way. This is just a series where I identified a lot of elements of it that are very very much elements that I don't enjoy. So sadly, it just didn't work for me, but I am really upset about it because I really thought I was going to love this series. I then caught up on one of my Patreon picks from, I think this one was July, but that was Slave to Sensation by Nalini Singh, which is the first book in the Psy Changeling series. I have heard amazing things, like nothing but amazing things about Nalini Singh. So I was really excited to pick this one up. And I gotta say, I did really enjoy it. It's probably one of the best paranormal romances that I've read, along with Dark Fever by Karen Marie Monin. But it still didn't, like, I didn't love it, you know, so it was still like a 3-star read. So in the world of this series, we have the Psy and we have the Changelings, and the Psy have psychic powers and the Changelings are pretty much shapeshifters. In the past of this world, there was an issue with the Psy being serial killers. So some sort of Psy governing body decided that they were going to take all of the emotions away from Psy so that there wouldn't be any serial killers anymore. They tried to just remove rage, but they found that they couldn't do that reliably, so they took every emotion from the Psy. Now this has made the Psy the world rulers because they can look at everything with an air of objectivity. Now the Changelings, on the other hand, are shapeshifters. They are very instinctual, they very much rely on their emotions, so these two are always at odds because they have very different beliefs. So our main character in the first book, Slave to Sensation, is Sasha, who is a Psy that believes that she is faulty because she is actually experiencing emotion, and she knows that if any of the Psy find out that she's experiencing emotion, then she will essentially be executed. So her mother has actually tasked her with working on a business project to build homes for the Changelings. It's just like a standard business deal, but because the homes are for the Changelings, the Psy, or Sasha specifically, is going to be working very closely with Changelings on this project. And that is where Sasha meets Lucas, who is the alpha of the Dark River Pack. Now Lucas actually has an ulterior motive when he's working with Sasha on this deal, as there's actually currently a serial killer who is targeting Changeling women. Lucas very strongly believes that the person responsible is Psy, and he wants to get close to the Psy to try and break into their system and find out who the murderer is. So the thing that I really liked about this, why it's one of the best paranormal romances that I've read, the world was interesting. It was a little bit more unique and different than other ones that I've read in the past. We also have like a very intricate system in here with especially the Psy and the way that works. It also felt like a little bit more on the sci-fi edge with that element. I also liked that it had a very well structured plot. I like that Sasha wasn't full of the dumb bitch energy that I see in the protagonists of the majority of paranormal romances like this that I've read, you know, the episodic kind of ones like True Blood and even Dark Fever to an extent, although I do know that that character does mature a lot. So I liked that we didn't have that very typical female protagonist of a paranormal romance in Sasha. The things that I didn't love about it is that I just don't think that I really love series or romance or paranormal series where each book follows a different couple, which is what the Psy Changeling series is. And I also felt like the delivery of a lot of the dialogue in here felt a little bit flat to me. Like I wasn't feeling it. It very much felt like I was reading a book, if that makes sense. And I typically want a much more immersive experience from romance. That being said, having read this, I'm not in a massive rush to continue the Psy Changeling series, although I definitely will consider it, especially if I find any of the books secondhand. But I am very excited to pick up the Guild Hunter series by Nalini Singh because I'm pretty sure, I'm not 100%, but I think that follows the same character throughout at least the first part of the series, because I know there's a little bit of a shift partway through that series where the covers change from like coloured ones to black ones. So I think that's more of like a spin-off or like an evolution of the original series. And then the final book that I read was a surprise to all of us because very late on in the month, Kelsey, also known as KJ Sutton, dropped me a message and said, do you want my new book? Here you go. So I picked it up immediately. When she sent it to me, I had 30 pages left of Slave to Sensation. So I was like, you know what, girl, we can start this right now. And I'm so glad that I did, because I've known that Kelsey's been writing this for a while. I've known a little bit about it, but I didn't know exactly what it was. And so the whole thing was a ride that I really enjoyed. So the book is called The Door at the End of the Stars, and it is a romantic suspense on a sci-fi backdrop, I want to say. So the type of sci-fi that this is like a futuristic version of our world. It's like 100 years in the future. We have artificial intelligence, like cell phones are embedded into your hand. They essentially do what they do now, but a lot more seamlessly. So like you can unlock things with them, you can turn lights on, you can FaceTime from them, all of that kind of stuff. Society is, for the most part, very much still like it is today. The sci-fi element is also kind of a crossover between the Joss Whedon show Dollhouse, which is one of my favorite shows, and also The Host by Stephenie Meyer, but make it Verity by Colleen Hoover, if you know what I'm saying. So in this one, we are following a woman called Ronnie, and content warnings in here for suicide, substance abuse, and addiction, because Ronnie's family aren't doing too good. Her younger sister is an addict, her mum is overworked and really stressed, and a few years in the past, her father actually committed suicide, so her family have fallen on really hard times. So Ronnie is essentially looking for anything that she can to be able to support her family, and she ends up getting a job as a host, which pays amazingly, because when you are a host, you are essentially allowing somebody else to rent your body. The process is supposed to be seamless, supposed to be like being asleep and you just wake up and it's like nothing's happened. However, the first time that somebody rents Ronnie's body, a few hours into the experience, Ronnie actually wakes up and she is like present the entire time this thing is going on. So this girl who's rented Ronnie's body is called Chloe. She heads to a bar, she picks up this guy, she hooks up with him. Ronnie's kind of like, well, this is a bit weird, but it's something that I kind of figured would probably happen during this hosting process, so we'll roll with it. And because her family needs the money that this job provides, she doesn't report the fact that there's like a glitch in the system in case she's fired because she can't work as a host anymore. And Ronnie very quickly starts to realize that not only is she for some reason awake during all of these hosting experiences, the same woman keeps renting her body, and the reason why she's doing it is because she very specifically wants to target a married man. So if you don't like cheating in books, you are going to want to leave your morals at the door when you pick this one up, or just not read it, I guess, because yeah, there is romance in here. The guy is married. It has thriller elements because like, who is Chloe? Why is she specifically targeting this guy? Like, what's going on with all of that? Let me tell you, this entire book was just a ride. I loved it. Similarly as with when I read Verity by Colleen Hoover, I just loved that I didn't really know where this story was going. What's different about a romantic suspense to me as opposed to a normal thriller is that you get sucked into the romance element of it, which makes you doubly as invested, because for me, the two most compelling genres to read that have me sucked in and turning pages are romance and thrillers. So when you combine the two, I'm in for a ride and I am hooked immediately. I was simping for a married man, cannot lie. Cannot lie, I definitely left my morals by the door when I checked into this book. The main character is a dancer, so there's a lot of discussion about ballet and travel and grief and healing, with this just really absorbing out that plot. Like, I just couldn't believe my eyes when I was reading this. I was having a great time. So I did give this one 4 stars. I do think that there were a couple of loose ends that weren't fully tied up in here, like some of the motivations of some of the characters I feel like could have been more fleshed out, and I also feel like everything that happened at the end played out a little bit too quickly, where there was definitely like slower points in the middle that could have been like condensed a little bit, and like the end could have been fleshed out. But honestly, it was like full on vibes. Had a great time, loved it. Would definitely recommend if you want a wild ride, once again, like Verity by Colleen Hoover. So there you have it. Those are the 10 books that I read in the month of August. Not all hits, but we can't always have all hits. We had a couple of bangers in there and a couple of big disappointments. In the month of September, I'm very excited because it's the Bookoplathon and I have grand plans. I want to read so much in September. I have a couple of books like Her Soul for Revenge that I'm really excited to read, which I think is going to help me pick up the pace. And also September and October is my favorite time of year in terms of the weather and the atmosphere. It's cozy reading season, guys. We're here already. I'm sweating today wearing this jacket, but it's the 1st of September as I'm filming, so I'm very much in the fall vibe. I had a pumpkin spice latte this morning. Life is good. Once again, a big thank you to Book of the Month for sponsoring this video. Please don't forget, if you head to my description box, click on the link and enter the code Becca at checkout, you can get your very first book of the month for just $9.99. Down in the comments, please don't forget to let me know if you've read any of these books and what you thought of them, and also let me know what your favorite book of August was, because I would love to know. But aside from that, guys, please don't forget to like this video if you liked it and subscribe if you wanna. If you head into my description box, you'll find a link to my Goodreads, Instagram and Twitter if you'd like to follow me on any of those, as well as link to my Bookish candle website, the Instagram for that, and a 10% off discount code. But that's it from me today, guys. Bye!
Oh, you bite your friend like chocolate. You say you'll go when nobody knows, with guns hidden under our petticoats. We're never gonna quit it, no, we're never gonna quit it, no.